And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel.
I'm Zee Garcia.
I'm Roy Cannaday.
And I'm Mike DiLisio.
Today we're taking a look at the second series, the first game in the second series of Time Stories, called the Hadal Project, I think.
Time Stories Revolution.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, so Time Stories was a game that came out. It was a single game in which you played through a scenario and you would go through what they called runs. You would go through and at a certain point your time would run out and you'd start over again.
Sci-fi concept.
And then you'd go back through and try to figure out what you did wrong, fix it, and keep going until you won the scenario. There was 9 of them, I think, in total.
There were 9 expansions.
And they at some point, they said this is Series 1, the white box series. This is called the blue box series, I believe. Because it's slightly blue on the front. I don't know. Anyhow. If you can go, we played several of the Time Stories live.
Yes.
Yeah.
We also, me and Z, we have played every single one of the old Time Stories, and we played them all together. So what's your...
I think I've played all of them except for like maybe 3. I played the Arctic one. Maybe I played the one after that. I haven't played the Hollywood one. I haven't played the... Is there like a pirate one?
Yes.
Yeah.
You didn't play
That
Madame.
one. I haven't played Madame.
But you watched us play it, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's that.
I am very clearly the least experienced in Time Stories. I played the Marcy case, the first in-the-box game, and never went beyond that.
All right, so to get where we're coming from, for me, the original Time Stories, not this game out at all, was a 10 out of 10. I loved it, thought it was fantastic. I still loved it, Marcy case, and the next one. The next couple dipped a little bit for me, and as time went by, each successive one, I thought, I'm not as interested in the system. And then there was an overall story in Time Stories, which I thought was just trash. Had possibly the worst ending to any story in a game that I've ever played, I think.
Yes. I am pretty much in the same boat. I rated the game immediately after we played. The very first box, a 10 out of 10. I believe my rating now, if I'm not mistaken, is a 5 out of 10.
Wow.
That doesn't devalue our first experience, which was fantastic. Just that the
That's
system
true.
as a whole was not as exciting. So I was kind of excited about a reboot. What did you said you only played 1.
I only played 1, and I think part of the issue for me was that I played it after the initial hype had exploded. And so I think if my first experience with the game had been when I hadn't heard much about it, it would have been more of a mind-blowing experience. But I kind of had an idea of what I might expect, and so I think it lessened some of that initial wow factor that most people get when they play it for the first time.
Right.
I feel like Time Stories, when it first came out, it was just so huge because like, oh man, this game's doing all this crazy stuff. But now we have so many escape room games and so many games that give you that same sort of feel that like when this was huge, like when it first came out, I was super pumped about all the cool things like, oh man, it's like a point and click adventure, you're doing all this different stuff. But now there's lots of games that give you that sort of feel.
So we're not actually going to do a how to play here because I don't want to spoil anything in this. But there might be minor things. If you don't want to know nothing about it, why are you watching a review? The game is a self-contained game. This comes by itself. You don't need the board or anything. In fact, they get rid of the board. They get rid of a lot of the stuff in the original game.
Yes.
And it's the same concept, though. In
Yes.
fact, as far as I can tell, the story is extremely convoluted. I think it's the same time agency you're in, although they're not super clear on that in this game.
Right.
And I think there's still an overall story, sort of, except the new ones you're not supposed to play in any particular order. They said that about the last one, but it's clearly a lie.
That was
Yeah.
definitely not true.
But in this one, you're supposed to play them in, and there's another box I got over here called Experience, in which you can play that in between to have the overall story, but you can ignore that if you want to and just talk about this.
Yes.
And in this case, that's what we're going to talk about, just this game.
Yes.
In this game, you are going through, it is, it's called the Hadal Project. You're trying to stop a virus from destroying the Earth. That's about all you'll know about the plot. This was originally written, Roy played this way back in the day as a prototype.
Yeah, I had some friends who are actually from Tantrum House or whatever.
The Delps.
The Delps, and they actually had me play test this. They have changed it actually a decent amount, but
Well, this
the
was
overall
written
story
for
was
the
same.
first Time Stories.
Yeah, this was actually, I played this version in the regular Time Stories like system, it was like the second or third game I ever played of Time Stories. So I played it like right after the first scenario, in between Marcy Case, or maybe right after Marcy Case. So very early in my Time Stories experience had I played the super prototype version of this.
So in this game, there's no resetting and starting over again. Well, ish, but spoilers, but ish. So they got rid of that. They got rid of the dice, and instead of dice, there's now Azrak, blue gem thing, which is kind of a way to keep track of how you do tests. There's a deck of cards, very similar to that in Gloomhaven, that you use that with this Azrak, and you're kind of managing resources, and every time you do things, eventually you'll lose one of those permanently, and you're trying not to lose too many of them permanently till you get to a point where you win the game. And if you do get to a point where you would lose the game, they said this happens rarely. Sure, I believe that. Then you could reset the whole thing and play again.
Right.
I would say it's a 3-hour game, maybe.
Sure.
Sounds about right.
Sure.
Yeah, it sounds about
I mean, part of me wants to just compare this to the original game.
I don't see how you can get away from that. You
Part
really
of me
do.
wants to just kind of talk about what I think of this in a bubble. I guess we might as well do both.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the story/art, because that's almost devoid from the game.
Right.
Sure, but it's also artwork. Look at pictures, and you'll know what you think of it.
Sure, but I like but you don't see a lot of the art in the game until you go through it.
Sure, I mean,
Right.
it's good. I like it, but again, you might hate it. I don't know. Art, I try not to talk about too much because it's artwork. You can look at it and
Whatever.
immediately you know if you like it or not.
Okay, well, I like the art a lot.
I like it too.
I also really like the story in this one. I thought it was a pretty decent story. It was cool, interesting.
Sure, it's better than a lot of the stuff that came later in Time Stories, the original.
It was finally sci-fi. The whole Time Stories itself is sci-fi, right? And they were like, ooh,
Right.
you're going to go back and all different cool things. And then it was almost all historical.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a pretty clear narrative, too. It was not convoluted. It wasn't hard to keep track of what was going on. I think sometimes in a
Yes.
sci-fi setting, you can get a little lost in the narrative, and this is a pretty clear narrative throughout.
I agree. It's straightforward. Yeah, some of those other ones, they start throwing names at you of people in that world.
Right.
And after a while, I'm just lost. Who are they talking about? Who's this character again? There were moments that I clearly could tell were meant to be like surprises, and I just wasn't wowed because I'm like, and you run into this person and Habib, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. Am I supposed to know who that is?
Right.
It seems like the way they illustrated this card is supposed to be for me to go, there he is. I don't remember who that is. There's too many names, and I have no idea what's going on.
Now,
This one doesn't do that, by the way.
while I thought the story was good, the rule book, unfortunately, not quite so clear. Now, I'm not saying that it was hard to figure out how to play the game. That was there. But the problem with Time Stories has always been, we'd say, what do we do in this situation? Well, you can't really look it up because it's spoilers for the game, etc. This is a single one-shot game. There's no reason. They could not anticipate it, some of the questions people would ask. There were a couple times in this game where we turned over a card and we were like, okay, that says to do this. There was a couple major points in this game where it said do this. And we're like, well, does that mean this? Why would that not be clear? I do not understand that. I'm very frustrated about that. I really feel like someone in playtesting, a blind playtester, would have said, what do we do in this situation? And they're like, oh, people might not understand. We'll write that down.
Right.
Yes.
We made some guesses, and in our game we once got stuck completely, and then we started reading cards, figured out, and then we realized, oh, we can do this, but the rules had never been clear that we could.
Right. Yeah, it would be nice if they could figure out how to iron out some of the ambiguities in the system.
No, my tolerance for that's zero in this case.
They've
it's a 10th
been doing
one.
it for so long at this point, right?
Well, we're four people that have played games quite a bit, right? You would think that in that type of a situation, all four of us would not be completely lost. And all four of us were really, not just once, several times having to make guesses. And say, well, this makes the most sense. You shouldn't have to do that. Like you said, especially in a stand-alone situation like this. No.
It was very interesting
Right.
for me playing this because a lot of times I was trying to hold back to try to not spoil any stories or give any like spoilers, and it was very different in a lot of ways. But then there were certain points where it's like it was completely different, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what we do to progress. And there was a point where we got to that. It's like, oh, we're supposed to do this other thing. Okay, well, it would be nice if we would have known we could have done that. You know, that sort of stuff.
Let's talk about. I mean, I guess let's compare it to the original one, and if people liked certain parts or didn't like certain parts, if they would like this. Like for example, the combat in this is not dice; it is a deck of cards plus a total you reach by spending resources.
Any test, not just combat.
Right.
Pretty much anything. Yeah. Do you like that system?
I thought I would at first, but I didn't. It's boring. And there's a deck of cards that has modifiers that you'll flip over.
It's a small deck.
It's a small deck, so it slows the game down. We all stop. Okay, there's a +2 and a -2 left. Okay, so this situation can happen here, whatever. I felt that was and even more so, to me, it was a weird system that they have here where if you hit the number exactly on the test, then you get the best result.
Right.
You get lower than that, you fail. You get above that, you get a result, but not as good, which doesn't make any thematic sense. Like if I'm punching a guy, oh, you punched him just right. Like what?
Right.
I feel like if I put all my force behind it, that's just as good.
Right.
And getting that exact number is almost impossible to do when there's a modifier deck. You're just like guessing. Like maybe we can do this.
You're just you're figuring out the odds, right? That's what it is.
Sure, but I don't care about odds
The
so
problem
much.
is it slows down tremendously when you have to count.
Right.
Oh, you have to know the composition of that little deck. It's only like 8 cards, but you have to know it.
And you'll go through
inside
that
and
deck
out.
multiple times during the
So
game.
you have to stop when you do a test, and you go, I need a total to be 4. Mine is 3. How many zeros are in there?
Right.
And how many +1s? Okay, so if I add 1, then that's better than not adding an extra 1. You have to do that a lot. I do, but I'll say this. I think I might actually like the system better than the dice.
Well, I didn't like the dice. I got
But
tired
not
of the
by
dice.
much. Yeah, right.
It also takes you out of the immersion of the game because now you're doing a little math problem. Is what
little
you're doing.
bit,
You're
yeah.
like, okay, we have a 30% chance of it being this, so let's hedge our bets and put in this much of it. It doesn't feel like the rest of the game at all.
Yeah, but it's super
Sure.
critical too. That's my
It
problem.
is.
Oh, you missed it here. You missed an important clue.
Right.
Because you took a chance or you guessed 50% and you were wrong.
Right.
And I think it's kind of interesting that like these things will happen randomly in different places, just like the challenges would in the other. But the way that the whole like Azrak time thing works is if one person keeps getting a whole bunch of those challenges, it's really messing you up a whole lot. I think I went through like the first 3 locations and I never ran into like a single challenge where everybody else was running into stuff, and I had a ton of them, but everybody else was being like, oh, I'm out again. Oh, I'm out again. Just based off the locations we were randomly going to explore.
So let's talk about that system then. The runs versus one single long run that you do like a soft reset in.
Well,
Yeah.
I felt, first of all, that in this game they did a cheat to add runs to it anyway, even though they said they wouldn't. And I can't say more without spoiling it.
Right.
But I felt like they deliberately did it. They're like, oh, there's not runs. Oh, yes, there is. I felt like they did that.
Sure, but it is better.
It is better for sure because it's a straightforward thing. But Mike, when we were talking about this off camera, Mike brought up a good point that this game, you just like most of the time stories, like only 2 diverge from this, you have to do a very exact thing to win this game.
Yes.
A very exact thing. And yet it allows you to bypass very important things.
Yes.
Sometimes things that you can't easily go back to at all.
Yes.
And you didn't know you were supposed to go to important things.
Right.
In the first time stories, they got around that by, oh, you went to this room, you need a key. Oh, the key was back in another room. All right, well, next time around, we'll go back and get it.
Yes. Right.
This, because of the runs are gone, that made that part worse.
That's true. I guess that is a side effect of not doing multiple runs is you cannot redo things in a brand new order because you're going, you're moving. I would say this is a better system than the endless runs thing, especially some of the
Yes.
later scenarios in the original arc got ridiculous.
Right.
Where we would do 20-some runs. It's like at that point, you yourself are just starting to cheat where you're going, let's just pretend this was a new run. We ended up right here. Let's keep going, please.
Yeah.
So this is better, But you're right; it has its own problems that it'll bring to the table. That very concept. I think overall, none of us are particularly thrilled about it, and I think the vibe is coming across here. Where Tom and I certainly, and I don't know as much about you guys because you haven't played as much. We're hoping this would be the answer to all the problems that they have had years to figure out. Very clear problems that everyone, I won't say everyone, that a lot of people have pointed out, that they themselves have noticed. Again, they have done 10 scenarios for time stories. And when this is supposed to be the second stab at the entire thing, and out of the gate we're all going, I'm done.
Right.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about 3 things in here real quick that I liked and had a problem with. In this game, there's a mechanism where each character that you play comes with a little deck of cards. They're interaction cards. And if you go talk to a person, we'll say, look at card 3. And I talk to that person, and they will talk to me differently than they'll talk to Roy's character.
Yes, very cool.
That's a cool idea.
Yes, excellent.
It did not come into play as much as I thought it would be. And in fact, if you're not careful, you want to make sure the right person talks to the right person. Coupled with that, each person has like a secret objective that if you accomplish it, as far as I can tell, doesn't do anything negative to you other than that makes you, in this game, makes you do something that, I don't know, I felt bad about a couple of the things.
Yeah.
But then helps your final score at the end of the game. And now that I played this one, if I played another one of these, I'd be like, we got to accomplish your personal goals. Help me figure yours out. There was no negative to the team, really, other than theming.
Yes.
Right.
But the one thing I really dislike about this game, it comes with a sheet of counters.
Yes.
And these counters you punch out, but you're supposed to keep them face down. So I put all mine back in after this playthrough. I don't know how many playthroughs you're going to be able to put them back in. That's a counter sheet.
Sure.
Every single one of these counters, they're little counters with things on. This could have been another deck of cards.
They're very cheap counters.
They clearly did this to make this a disposable thing, in my opinion. There's even one card in this game that they tell you to write on and stuff, and it's like, is this disposable? The counter thing. Every counter could have been a card.
Absolutely.
But this game also had, I thought, a fairly large amount of red herrings, and in this particular instance, I'm getting tired of the red herrings.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want there to be some more payoffs. In this game, I thought some of the stuff was obvious. You know, like, you need this gold key to go in the gold door. Got it. That's really obvious. Now you found a blue key. Ooh, what's that for? Nothing. And that's not in this game, but that's the kind of vibe I got from a lot of stuff in this game.
It can also be a little dispiriting when everyone has their own individual deck of cards, and that is such a neat idea. And then you literally never draw a card from that deck. I never drew a card.
You never drew one.
Never drew a card from that deck.
I drew a card from the deck, but then didn't realize that I went the wrong branch in a branching conversation, and therefore stalled out the game at a certain point. So it's like, oh, well, we had to like figure out, oh, I need to talk to the person again, or something like that.
Yeah,
to be
that
able
was
to
kind
fix
of
the right thing.
Well, what about there was one big puzzle in the game. I thought it was a decent puzzle.
It's fine.
The puzzle was good.
It's literally the first 10 minutes of any decent escape room game.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's my final opinion on the game.
I mean, it's like, that's the thing. That puzzle in here only stands out because it's the only one decent one. I mean, spoiler-ish, but there's one big puzzle. And when I say big, I don't mean it.
Right.
Okay? It's not a big thing. Like,
yeah, but that's the only puzzle in the game, right?
it is.
And the mechanics of the game allow you to miss the significance of that puzzle. That's what happened to us.
And it stinks to also because I feel like in previous Time Stories things, there was ways that they could have done in this without spoiling anything to make it so things weren't missed. You know, they could have made it so it's like, oh, well, we can't do this before we do this. And the fact that we did do this before we did this means that we missed things that we needed.
Yeah, that was weird. So I'm with Z, actually. I'm done with the series. I just don't have time to keep going through these. I feel like these games have branched for me. There is the story-driven adventure games, and there's that new series from Thames and Cosmos, Adventure Games The Dungeon, very generically named, and Adventure Games Monochrome, which is mostly the story, and it's fantastic. It's a really good story. And then if I want the puzzles, I have all the exit room games. Both of those things are also fairly short, and they don't have all these, well, I don't know if we're allowed to do that. You know, what's
Yes.
the rules? What's all this? There's a lot of game in this box. I'll give it that. I'm kind of done with the series as a whole. So the next one will be reviewed by Mike and Roy.
Oh,
I don't have the patience.
Maybe it'll just be Roy.
At this point, there are so many games, and especially for a company that already did this, right? They did this. I don't have any patience for a lack of specificity. Figure it out. I don't want to guess. Tell me how the rules work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if I had to give this a
Also,
rating,
weird terminology. Stow means discard.
Yeah.
Oh my word! What a weird word to use.
sure.
especially when you read it as show.
Well, some people need to laugh.
Look at
is all
this.
I'm saying.
Look at this. No, it's.
I mean, if I had to
discard.
rate it, I guess I would give it maybe a 6 out of 10, maybe a 5.
I'd give it a 7 if I had never played the original series. If this was the first time I'd come to this, I'd be like, oh, this is pretty interesting. Having played the original series, it's a 5. Because the story's cool, but nothing here felt... The only really unique thing I thought was the different interaction cards talking to different people.
Sure.
And that was such
That's
a
the
minor
coolest
part
thing.
that I was
That was
not
the-
as interested.
That was the coolest thing.
I find it so weird to even give it any sort of rating since I did a little bit of playtesting with
3
the
out
game.
of 10, all right.
But I actually enjoyed the version I played before more than I enjoyed this with the whole new system. It just
Yeah, but could
didn't
that be just because it was such a new system?
and fresh. Maybe, but I also think that there were actual choices in the redesign for this that just didn't fit. Like, it feels like this game fit the older system better than it fit the new system.
Well, it was made for it, right?
Right. So I don't know. I still think it was an interesting experience, but I wish the playthrough would have gone a little bit better. And I mean, I don't know that I'd say I'd never play Time Stories again. I really enjoy the stories and stuff in it, but I'd love for it to actually work. You know, it felt like there were some issues. So
Maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe it's doesn't feel fresh and unique and like a truly new concept because it's not.
Right.
yeah.
When a game is a storytelling game, when the whole hook is supposed to be a good, compelling story with a great puzzle or 2 or 3 to go along with it, if the game mechanics get in the way of telling that story, that's a fundamental problem.
Yeah.
And that was my issue with it. I mean, I would be looking at a 5 myself, and I don't have a lot of experience with this particular series, but I have played plenty of the escape room type games, and the story looks like it's getting... the game gets in the way of the story. That's all I can, keep
I'll
coming
agree.
back to.
Right.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, there you go. That's the Hadal project. The first set in Time Stories Revolution. The second set's already been announced. There'll be more coming out, and maybe you'll see someone on us review them eventually. Probably Brian Drake. All right, go watch his review if you want a counterpoint to ours.
Yes.
Alrighty, until next time, I'm Tom Vasel.
I'm Zee Garcia.
I'm Roy Cannaday.
And I'm Mike DiLisio.
Have fun gaming.